In this ratio, I want to talk just about some miscellaneous kind of ratios. And essentially what we're going to look at is capacity and financing, how this all kind of fits together. So if you think about growth and financing, when a company is growing, it has to invest for that growth. Where does that money come from? How are they going to finance this growth? If they could use profits only, that would be great. All they have to do is use the profit of the company. They have no debt. There would be no external financing. But what happens if profits are not sufficient by themselves to pay for the growth? So in that case, they're going to have to go outside the company. They typically are going to go to debt first because debt is cheaper than equity. So they'll use all of the profits, which is equity, by the way. Then they're going to use debt and possibly combine that with equity depending on their financing mix. So the first question we have is something about capacity, right? So do we have capital intensity with respect to sales or assets, total assets, or also with respect to fixed assets? So we're looking at the company's capital intensity. High ratios mean the company needs more assets to provide for the current sales level. So it doesn't really reflect either too much or not enough. It just, when you're comparing it to similar assets, it just tells us whether or not we need to have an asset base that's larger than smaller. So this is capital intensity. And here, if you see for the company SCI, right, is the total asset capacity. And you see that Coors in general is much higher than the industry. So that means that Coors needs a substantial asset base in order to run its operations. And in fact, if you compare the fixed assets, their fixed asset base is much higher than what the asset base is for the average company in this industry. So it shows that in general, Disney has a greater need for an asset base to run its operations than the average company. So now if we understand the asset need, now we have to talk about the financing, right? At very low growth levels, we're going to be able to use retained earnings maybe exclusively. So we won't need any outside assets. But as the growth rates of sales increase and the growth rate of the need of assets increases, we're going to cross points where we're going to have to go to external financing. So what are the determinants of growth? What's going to make this company grow? The profit margin is going to help us with some operating efficiencies, right? If we're operating efficiently, profit margin should rise. Our dividend policy, right? We'll have a whole set of videos where we talk about the dividends of a company and how managers decide to pay or not pay dividends to its investors. Financial leverage, the choice of our optimal debt ratio certainly will have an impact on how we pay for this growth. And of course, total asset turnover looks at asset use efficiency. So the profit margin is about operating efficiency. The total asset turnover is about asset use efficiency. If we can increase that efficiency, we will increase the growth of the company. So there are two ratios that talk about financing them. So we have what's referred to as the internal growth rate. And the internal growth rate is the maximum growth rate of sales that we can finance entirely with profitability. No borrowing, and no stock issued, using retained earnings only. That would be the optimal kind of growth that we can do it without going outside the company. The sustainable growth rate is the maximum growth rate of sales until ultimately we have to go beyond profits. Before equity must take place. So we're using only profits and borrowing up to this sustainable growth rate. Anywhere beyond that growth rate, not only are we going to use profits, not only are we going to borrow money, but now we're also going to have to issue some stock if we want to purchase this level of assets. So here we have a graph. Here's the sales growth of our company, and you see that sales is growing pretty substantially over the last couple of years. And prior to this, right, here's our internal growth from 2015 to 2018. Given the growth rate of the sales, we didn't have to borrow any money. We didn't have to issue any stock. We could have used profit to purchase everything we wanted to purchase. But then sales kept growing. And now, this year, not only do we have to borrow money, but now if we're this growth rate in 2019, we're going to also have to use some issuing of equity to pay for the growth at this growth rate. So again, we want to pay attention to this because we know it takes time to issue securities. The final set of ratios that I want to talk about with respect to the company are really ratios we've talked about before, but now in this form, we're going to be looking at them in the form of cash flow. So the variable that we're plugging in here, the new variable, is EBITDA, EBITDA, earnings before interest, taxes, plus depreciation. So EBITDA divided by net worth gives us a return on equity kind of number, right? The cash flow to net worth, the cash flow to total assets. This gives us a form of return on assets. And then operating profit margin divided by sales. Again, gives us a picture of a cash flow number compared to the sales. So now here we have our companies, obviously. Here's the blue one is EBITDA divided by net worth, and then here's our ROE. So you can say here's blue, here's the orange, so we can see that they're going to look very similar, right? EBITDA to sales divided by net profit margin. Again, they look very similar. Here's gray, here's blue. There's not a great distinction between all of them. We can see that over the last year, 2017 and 18 were good years, but this last year, something dramatic has happened that these numbers have declined substantially. Obviously, we want to know what's going on with respect to these cash flow numbers. So again, that's the end of this video. We've covered several different categories of ratios. So my hope is that you have a better understanding of what these numbers mean to the company. See you next time.